objection, and I reserve the balance.
Gentleman's response is time. The lady from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, for all those who in future years look back on the vote we take today as a window into the soul of this Congress, for all those who will see the approval or defeat of this bill as a testament to how committed this body was to the ideals from which our nation draws its strength, for them, let me be very clear. On this day, the Republican majority shamelessly played politics with our most cherished principles. From the very beginning, this resolution and this so-called debate has been about one thing and one thing only: election politics. 6 months before our midterm elections, Republicans are falling back on the one play that has worked for them time and time again. They are sowing fear in the hearts of the American people and labeling any individual or organization that doesn't take its marching orders from the White House as a threat to our nation. Think of what we heard from leading Republicans over the past few days. They've called the disclosure of the SWIFT anti-terrorist program a disgrace. They've accused the newspaper that first wrote it, the New York Times, of forcing its, quote, arrogant, elitist, left-wing agenda, unquote, on the rest of the country. Mr. Speaker, if all this is true, then I have no choice but to conclude that our president, President Bush himself, is a disgraceful, arrogant, left-wing elitist, because it was Mr. Bush who leaked the story. Mr. Bush, as well as numerous top-ranking members of the administration, have proudly discussed their efforts to eliminate the finances of terrorists for 5 years. Not 2 weeks after September 11, 2001, President Bush told the world the United States had, and I quote, launched a strike on the financial foundation of the global terror network, end quote. Such claims have been made time and time, not just by the president, but by every top Republican official in power. What's more, no fewer than 20 current and former administration officials spoke to the New York Times reporters about the SWIFT program. Where do you think the Times heard it? The article that started this all could not have been written without their active help. What the New York Times did, as well as the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and newspapers throughout the country through news services, was to publish a story which had, in effect, already been published 1,000 times over by the White House itself and had even been on the Internet. The end result is a Republican administration intentionally leaking a story, as they did to Judith Miller of the New York Times, who was then their heroine, both publicly and privately, and then punishing the newspaper for reporting on the leaks. In such a context, the notion that one of our newspapers violated our national security last week is ludicrous on its face. Think of this degree of Republican hypocrisy and then consider this. The bill before us claims to stand against leaks, but it comes 6 years into an administration that has been willing to leak even the most sensitive information if it thought it would benefit from it politically. It is the height of irony to think that when the Bush administration sought to silence critics of its pre-war Iraq intelligence claims, it chose to leak the classified identity of a CIA agent as well as the previously classified components of a national security estimate to, of all places, the New York Times. But it did so, and it did so willingly. Where were the resolutions of protest from the majority during that scandal? Did we have any expression of outrage over the leaking of a covert agent who, I am told, not only jeopardized her contacts with the CIA, but the entire intelligence network itself, because people would not trust us anymore? Where were the resolutions of those protests about that? Nowhere. Where was the outrage when a national security asset, as well all her contacts in the intelligence community, were put into danger? There was none, because the Republicans said that was a permissible leak and it was profitable. The Republican outrage we see today stinks to high heaven, because the leak of Valerie Plame's identity last year came from high up, the highest ranks of its own White House. And when all of the contradictions inherent in this bill are laid bare, we can see what it is actually all about. Republicans need to change the debate of the real debate every day people are having in the country. That debate is about the wisdom of this 3-year, $400 billion war in Iraq. that's still claiming American lives even today. It's about the numerous scandals of its own creation that the majority is scrambling to explain away. It's about the fact that Republicans have been entirely unwilling to exercise any form of meaningful oversight over the programs implemented by Congress and the White House with disastrous results to our nation. It's about the very direction that America will take in the years ahead. Democrats have been eager to debate all of these issues, but Republicans, as we see today, are interested only in inventing enemies to point fingers at and turn the public against. And to do so, Mr. Speaker, they jeopardize even our most basic and our fundamental principles. They are willing with this bill, and with what they have and will say on the floor today, to make it the province of Congress to dictate to our cherished independent media what it can and cannot report about and what it can and cannot say. But blaming the messenger is nothing new in this country, Mr. Speaker. The first time a newspaper was punished by an elected official was 1735, when a New York publisher wrote unflattering things about the governor of the New York Territory and was put in jail. Only a few decades later, the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed by Congress to silence those who opposed American involvement in war with France. But today, threaten retribution and legal action against virtually every news organization in this country simply to gain a few points in the polls. It is a debasement of this Congress and a desecration of the nation's ideals. Mr. Speaker, my friends on the other side of the aisle and in the White House have a right to be worried about what lies ahead for them, but what they do not have the right to do is to politicize our national security. They do not have the right to hypocritically and arbitrarily decide when the nation's been endangered by a leak and when a leak is entirely acceptable. And they most certainly do not have the right to reshape this Congress into a body more concerned with, in truth, little more than political retribution against an equally arbitrary enemies list. The American people expect this majority and this administration to guard information, not punish newspapers for writing about it after it has been officially revealed at the highest source of the government. Think about that for a moment. The President of the United States, time after time after time, has bragged on this program and yet pillories the New York Times and other papers for writing about it. They understand, the citizens of this country understand at the end of the day, the job of protecting our national security falls on the shoulders of our elected officials, not just on journalists whose primary duty is to objectively report on the world around us. Our citizens expect this body to do much more than it's doing here today. I expect it to follow a higher calling. They expect it to follow a higher calling, and they're right. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida, or gentleman from Texas, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, President of the United States did speak about this